This is TLV1.
The Tel Aviv Review.
Hello and welcome to the Tel Aviv Review. I'm your host Gilad Halpern. Every week we bring you conversations with authors about the books and research and other things that we like. And if you like us, please consider becoming a Patreon supporter by going to our homepage. That's tlv1.fm/Tel Aviv Review. Scroll down to the bottom and click the big red button that says Patreon. Click and support us. Some of you have been doing this for months and years, and we simply cannot thank you enough. My guest today is a professor of political science, teaching at Ben Gurion University's Department of Politics and Government. He has written extensively on the meeting point between social cleavages and political power, most recently in a new book co-written with Yair Yassan, titled Usual Suspects, Minorities, Police and Citizenship in Israel, and was published last year in Hebrew by the Open University Press. Professor Guy Ben-Porat, hello and welcome back to the Tel Aviv Review.
Thank you. Good to be back here again.
So the police are in many ways a perfect case study because they are the ultimate expression of Max Weber's famous definition of state sovereignty, which is having a monopoly on legitimate violence. Are the police really the epitome of state power?
I think yes, and even more than that, and that's where we begin our book. They're also about citizenship. And we begin the book with a mental exercise. We ask our reader to imagine if he sees a police officer. What does he feel? Does he feel fear? Does he feel secure? Is he ambivalent? Apathetic? And the answer tells us something about who you are. It's about class. It's about maybe skin color, ethnicity, religiosity. So the encounter with police often tells us, whether it's a real or imagined encounter, who we are, what is our value as citizens.
But that's really not a very Israeli thing, or exclusively an Israeli thing. This is how people all over the world feel vis-a-vis the police, right?
Yeah, that's why we have a comparative angle there. Though it's not a comparative book, we do have a comparative angle. These are things you can experience in many countries, but they can be different experiences. I mean, skin color can have different meaning in different places, as ethnicity. So police tells us something about how citizenship is structured in those countries.
Going back to the Israeli case, the current government has all but declared a war on all public institutions that maintain civil rights on the one hand and law and order on the other, with a certain degree of success, and we'll get to that later in the conversation. But I think that the Israel police is an exception in this sense because it was dysfunctional long before the government set out to ruin it.
I think police for many years has been a very problematic institution. In many ways, it's about the comparison to the military. While the military enjoys prestige and respect, in Israel in general, citizens have low esteem of police, and that affects the interaction with police. Having said that, we see differences between different groups in Israel. So maybe all citizens have a certain perception of police, but why they reach that perception may be of different causes and reasons.
Now, going back to your mental exercise, many people in Israel, because of what you just said about, comparing or falling short of the status of the military, their feeling towards the police is one of contempt or dismissal, or there's this lack of esteem.
I agree, but again, think of policing and the division to citizenship, that we have citizens that police have an interest in protecting them, in providing them with security. We have those that police has less interest in securing them. And we have those that are perceived as a threat to others. That's kind of a very crude division you can think of in different countries that you can find these things.
You mean Ashkenazi, Mizrahi, and Arabs? I mean, these are really roughly the categories?
I think it would be Arabs who are neglected by the police. It could be about class and where you live, where you might receive better policing comparing to others. And who is a security threat? It can change. It can be Ethiopians demonstrating. It can be Haredi people demonstrating. It could be anti government demonstrators. So, threats, all these categories are not necessarily stable. They can change in time.
Well, where do you think that difference in approaches to the military and the police in Israel come from?
The military is a people's army. So, it's something that we all share a feeling and participate in. I say all, of course, not everyone is, but if you look at
that's the ethos.
That's the ethos, at least. It doesn't include Arab, not Haredim, but mainstream Israelis. They either serve in the military, their children serve in the military is perceived as protecting us. Police does not have the same status. And even if you look from an academic perspective, there is very little writing on police. All over the world, by the way. If you think of military scholars, there's a whole list of scholars, and you can rank them. On policing, you have much less writing, many done by criminologists. So, sociologists, political scientists dealing with police, not recently there very much.
Why is that? As we said, it's really the epitome of a social and state institution.
Because I think for many years, the militaries, were part of the state structure apparatus, protecting the borders, etc., etc. While police were service providers that for mainstream society were kind of bureaucrats you could ignore. You'd approach them when you had a problem, when someone broke into your house, and you would evaluate them by the service you got, which many times was okay. If you were a minority and you were over-policed or neglected, that was missed out, many by scholars and by journalists.
Also, again, the thing about the military being the provider of national security as opposed to the police being some sort of, as you said, a service provider. How does that play out in Israel, where the boundaries are often blurry between the two? And just to give one obvious institutional example is the border police. That is, I think, case in point in this sense, because it is a thoroughly military unit dealing with military stuff and that of national security, but at the same time, they are part of the police and are under the command of the police commissioner.
It's absolutely blurred. And we also see that during times of crisis, when you have, for example, high levels of terrorism, police receives more respect and more trust. When citizens see police as protecting them on the streets from a real imminent threat, police receives more trust and more respect.
Like in the immediate wake of the 7th of October, for
Exactly.
example.
Or the 2000 events, or other rounds of violence. But when police is about traffic infringements, about ticketing drivers, and about providing services, that might be perceived less as protecting us. For wrong reasons, by the way. I think police is a very important institution. I think that we neglected police. Us, we mean academics, civil society, maybe also people on the middle left spectrum, that we ignored police has been a grave mistake.
What about police violence? I mean, this is, as you said, it's a service provider. It's probably the only service provider that rolls out violence as part of its work. That probably also accounts for people's reaction and attitudes to it.
Interesting. I was reading on my way here 2 articles, one about El Salvador and one about South Africa. In El Salvador, the new president, not so new, has fought violence with violence. So he was able to fight gangs with the abuse of human rights. And in South Africa, police uses methods for interrogation used during the apartheid era. So here's the the dilemma. People want to have more security, and for that, they want a strong police. Having a strong police can be perceived as a police without an authority over police, without accountability. So, right wing politicians in the US, in Israel, and elsewhere have made this equation. If you want to have a strong police to provide you with security, you need to allow police the freedom to operate. Don't interfere with police work. And that's a dilemma we see in many countries these days.
Is that a new thing? I would think that it's really a very fundamental perception of police work. I mean, to what extent is violence legitimate and necessary?
It's an old question. It became more pertinent in recent years for several reasons. First, minority groups who rebel, who claim that good policing, as you call it, has been harassment. It's been on our expense. So for the, let's say, the white majority to feel secure, black people over policed and abused. So that's one thing. Other thing is the rise of crime. As you have growing inequalities, you have more crime. And of course, you have the social media that makes these crimes even more in the public mind. So you have people that live in sort of fear of crime, a police perceived as inadequate. So what they want is more policing, using more force, and sometimes on the expense of democracy and equality.
And there's a backlash to it in the form of defund the police campaigns and etc.
So that has been one of the responses from the left. So if we can't have a police that we control, that abides with democratic standards, better have no police at all. However, this was a mistake because even if you look at US statistics, Trump has received more votes from minorities than before. So this whole attitude of let's defund the police has backfired. Because at the end of the day, people need police, especially poor people. So it's bad police or no police. Maybe bad police is better.
Well, was defund the police ever implemented?
No.
Yeah.
But the very idea that's how the right plays the cards.
Right.
We are here to defend the people. And for that, we want a strong police. What the left is offering is to neglect the people and constrain police. What do you prefer? And that's a strategy that worked very well for the right here and in the US.
Exactly. So I want to take it back to Israel, because that probably accounts for the ambivalence of Israeli minorities as well. On the one hand, they are often abused by the police, but on the other, they are the ones who enjoy its services more than others, probably.
When we began researching policing, when I began, more than a decade ago, one of the first surveys I received was very surprising. Arab citizens wanted more police than Jewish citizens. They were more concerned with being under-policed than with over-policed. And initially that seemed a bit strange. That's a minority that for many years has clashed with police, has suffered police brutality, and yet it wants police. Then we began to look at crime statistics. It became very obvious. Crime in Arab towns has grown so much. Insecurity has become such a phenomenon that they need police. It comes to a point where they would even consider having the Secret Service come in on top of the police.
Who's they? They're leaders.
The leaders and even some citizens are saying that. The Secret Service has been for years monitoring them, been part of the undemocratic future of Israel from their perspective. Yet they're so desperate, and they believe that they have more capacities, the Secret Service, so if they can stop crime, bring them in.
because police were perceived as the long arm of the security establishment of Israel, or was it? I'm trying to understand where the line is drawn between the police and other security apparatuses in Israel in the eyes of the Arab public.
So if we go back for many years, these were in many cases traditional communities that could, to some extent, police themselves. So crime was rather low. So they would not want police interfering with their lives, perceiving police as an arm of the state that is, from their perspective, unequal, undemocratic. And police did not have a desire to be in those villages unless they were perceived as a threat to national security. It's kind of a status quo. You have in those towns and villages very limited policing, and if they come in, it's for national purposes to arrest people that are a threat to national security.
So potential terrorists, really,
Exactly.
not car thieves.
Exactly.
Mhm.
But as years go by and those towns and villages modernize, the old structures fall apart. So they can no longer police themselves. And what you have now is organized crime, gangs, drug dealers, illegal weapons. And at this point, police do not have people in those villages enough and not the trust to enter. And from the Arab citizens' perspective, this is purposeful state neglect. That's how they see it.
Well, how do you see it?
The same way. But we can look at this neglect in a wider perspective. It's about education, it's about infrastructure, it's about employment, it's about poverty. All those breed crime. So when you think of inequality, policing is just one aspect of it, but a very important aspect.
Yeah, it's another one state service out of many that they're just not getting enough of.
But I think it's kind of a cornerstone. If you don't have policing, if you don't have security, all the rest falls apart. If you have children in school who come with guns to school, if you have business people who need to pay protection, people can't walk the streets because of gangs, then policing is kind of an essential service that everything else hinges upon.
What about the ethnic makeup of the police in Arab communities? Because as you said, they see it as long arm of the Israeli state establishment that is, of course, predominantly Jewish and therefore there to discriminate against them. So the police forces, historically and also today, in Arab communities, did they make an effort to include people from the communities themselves, or was it an imposition from the outside, regardless of how badly run it is, and all the underinvestment and all the things that we say, just the mere existence of it? Does it have any potential?
Not necessarily. They have made some effort, but there are many questions about the recruitment and its impact. For example, can Arab citizens who live in that village also police that village? You have all these divisions into clans and families, can't really operate there. But beyond that, we know from the world that by itself, recruitment does not really change police. Police might change those who are recruited to it. So if you look at the US, you can see in many towns, African Americans, police officers, even police chiefs, that police under their command is still committing racial profiling and violence. So by itself, changing the makeup of police might not have the desired effect.
But does it change the motivation of minority groups to sign up to the police?
Well, signing up to the police has, of course, the personal aspect, a career, a salary, but also the status. I mean, do I want to join a police who is perceived as offensive to my people? That's a question. And if I join that police, will I make a difference? Will I be part of a system which I don't be part in? So it raises many questions. So recruitment has some benefits, but it's difficult in when you have little trust in police. And if you do recruit, again, that's B, maybe that will not have the effect you desired.
You seem to be somewhat dismissive of the impact of recruitment.
I'm not dismissive. I think that if you only bring in African American officers
Right.
or Arab officers or any other group into the police, and you claim, okay, now we change the police, you might be overestimating the impact.
Right. So
If
it's
you
not
don't change the
enough, yes.
practices, the training, the oversight, then what you might have is officers of different colors who do the same job as the others did before them.
Before we go back to the Arab question in Israel, which is, I think, to me, the most interesting and really the crux of much of the debate here, one thing you can say about police discrimination in Israel, at least, that it's really across the board. I mean, it's not just a Jewish versus Arab thing, but there's police discrimination traditionally against Mizrahi Jews and more recently against Ethiopian Israelis. I would think that if looking at it from the security perspective, that in many other aspects, perhaps except policing, Jewishness was sort of an insurance policy against violence and brutality of all kinds. You can see, for example, recently in anti-terror operations. I mean, if there's a terrorist attack, a gunman running loose, if there's he's suspected of being an Arab, he's probably being shot on the spot, and if he seems Jewish, he probably wouldn't be. Of course, I'm generalizing, but that's the general way things are run here. And also, you look at it from the perspective of the average police man or woman, that Arabs would get much less preferential treatment than Jews, even for the same sort of offense. I don't know whether it's disturbing the peace in any shape or form. But there's still, as you show in the book, there's still the violence is really running really across the board. You know, and as you said in the beginning of this conversation, the roles of the agents of chaos can change according to circumstances. So does it really say? I mean, I'm trying to understand to what extent Jewishness does really play a role here. To what extent is it really an insurance policy?
It plays a role, absolutely. But there's a hierarchy within that citizenship. So being Jewish is a privilege compared to being Arab. But what kind of Jew? In the 1950s, when Mizrahim, when they rebel, when they protest against the state for discrimination, they are depicted as potential enemies of the state or as a threat to public security, public peace. So there's a hierarchy. It's true that as years go by, they integrate more than Arabs because they are part of the Jewish collective. So Jewishness, at the end of the day, is a privilege. Ethiopians can play that card.
But it doesn't serve them very well, does it?
Compared to whom? Again, it's a hierarchy.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about Ethiopians, if you want, for a second. So Ethiopians, when we did our first survey, my survey, years ago, they were the group that had the most trust in police. More than Arabs, more than Russian immigrants, more than our mainstream Israelis. And we knew already that there was discrimination and police violence. And yet, they were the group with the highest trust. We tried to figure why, and we thought this was the older generation. That was their way to denounce racism, to say it's temporary. It's not structural. We are part of the Jewish people. It's not all officers, just some officers. And we are Jewish. We'll be okay. But the younger generation spoke a different language. If you remember years ago, the beating of a soldier that was televised and aired became viral. It was a young Ethiopian soldiers walking in uniform who had a clash with officers who beat him. When this thing went viral, it spun a whole response of young Ethiopians that said, I had that experience. And they spoke a different language. They said, we will not put up with that. We are Jewish. We served in the military. We sacrificed. There's no justification for discrimination.
But I would expect the average police officer, even that who beat up that young Ethiopian soldier, to know that and act accordingly.
I think at that point, they were very vulnerable. We had those focus groups with young Ethiopians. And they had this statement that came in several different sessions where they said, and that's in their words, if a white boy would be arrested by the police, his mother would come down to the station and raise hell. We don't have a back. There's no backing. We have no support. We are weak vis-a-vis the police. And police can use that. That was kind of their narrative. So it's about vulnerability. But officers encountering those young Ethiopians who could have been maybe drunk or misbehaving, but if they were white kids, it might have, gone a different way. And when these stories add up, you get a story of over-policing that's about skin color that's kind of played kind of similar ways to what happens in the US. It's not the same. That's how it was played here. And when those young Ethiopians were told by police, okay, we hear you. We're going to recruit more Ethiopians. They said, but you have many in the police. And police said, you know what? How about cultural training? We'll train officers to be more sensitive. Said, what culture? We're Israelis. We were born here. There's no culture. It's racism. So this young generation was able to capitalize on its being Jewish and on its integration. Again, there's still discrimination.
But it's bearing fruit. That's what you're saying.
I think it's bearing fruit in the public minds.
Mm-hmm.
I think this was something that the Israeli public had a very hard time to resist. So people said, they're blocking roads, and I don't agree with that, and why they make all this fuss. And they might have been angry at a certain point on Ethiopians for blocking traffic and demonstrating. But deep in their hearts, they knew that there's no justification for police violence. With Arab citizens, well, we never know what they've done, right? There's a security issue. So police has more leeway there.
Guilty until proven innocent.
Exactly. The police has more leeway there.
But a different control group, if you will, is really in the very last few years, white kids, as you said, have been the subject of police brutality, and I'm talking about the anti-government protesters that perhaps enjoyed a great deal of immunity until the last couple of years, really, when a new minister came in and this whole changing of the guard within the high ranks of the police that were perhaps more liberal to police violence. Does that change anything in the way that the police are perceiving themselves and the general public is really perceiving the police? And maybe some of the insights that you bring, because right now we have a group that until recently was really immune to police violence, subjugated to police violence.
Exactly. I think that for many Israelis, police was something you could ignore. You could sympathize with Ethiopians, saying, it's unjust, I sympathize with you. You could, say, well, Arab violence is terrible, it needs to be stopped, and the killing needs to be stopped, we need more police there. But it did not affect your life. But what we're trying to say is that when there is no oversight of police, when violence is condoned by the public in different ways, because again, it doesn't threaten me, then this at some point might hurt also other people. So when there are demonstrations against the government, and they can be depicted as a public threat, as a security threat, then police, without oversight, will have more legitimacy to use violence. And we've seen that in recent years, absolutely.
Now, can it backfire is really what I'm asking, because we see fewer and fewer people, and people who are in powerful positions within society. Police for them is not transparent anymore, right? It's something that they see. So can this development backfire and put, in due course, the police under more control and surveillance?
I want to begin with something a bit different. I think police, in general, requires trust and legitimacy. And police is losing the public's trust. And that's a main issue that police should be concerned with. In order to be effective, police needs people to be cooperative and to obey. You can get obedience by fear, but you also want legitimacy. You want people to obey because they think police is working on their behalf. And police is losing more and more people. That's one thing. Now, about the backfiring, it depends on several things. First, as we see in other places in the world, the radical right is allying with the police. Under the people that are a threat to our security, they can be foreign immigrants, they can be minorities, they can be left demonstrators. And police with the radical right have this common narrative. We need to bring security. And for that, we need to lessen the oversight of police. And democracy might be a privilege in times of crisis. We know this from history, how this works. Question is, what will the other people do? What would the center-left politicians do? Would they stick to defund the police and things like that? Would they ignore the police? Or would they claim the police? Police being something that we need, it's our police. It needs to be a police that is working in a democratic order under oversight for the benefit of all people. There's a competition here on who will have the correct narrative and the political leverage to take control of police. That's where we are right now, in the US, in Israel, and elsewhere.
I mean, many people have said that the police was taken over by the far right for good reason. The minister now is an extremely interventionist far right agitator who openly talked about taking over the police and appointing people who would obey his orders against the law. By the way, this should be said, right? I mean, it's according to the law, the police are separate, are not subjected to the minister directly. Is it really a takeover? Is it really serious? Have we passed the point of no return?
I think it's a dire threat. On top of all things you've said, he's also very incompetent. Because this government came into power with a promise of governability. That was the claim. We're going to govern this society. We're going to bring peace and order. In practice, all statistics show it's a complete failure. Crime rates have soared. If you look at the previous government, that was able for the first time to curb killings in Arab society, it skyrockets now. Under this government, it doubled the number of homicides. You could say it's Arabs. Why should we care? Well, for two reasons. First, a democracy should care for all its citizens. That's basic. But if you want to be instrumental, the illegal weapons and the crime in Arab society at some point will spill over into Jewish society. If you're not convinced by the democratic values of equality, then be concerned about the impact. So, one thing is the ongoing neglect of Arab society and the complete failure to bring order. Second, it's about the politicization, but nominating of officers according to loyalty, which brings in apparently officers who might not be as good as expected. And directions given that create chaos. That's another thing. And police, again, loses trust and legitimacy. And also privatization. This minister has prided itself on allowing more private weapons. We have no more guns than ever. And we can imagine what will happen with these guns. They will be part of shooting incidents, part of criminals getting hand of them. They'll be lost, mishandled. We had some cases already. So the basic idea that the state has a monopoly of violence under democratic institutions is something that should be brought back into the public's minds. It's not about neglecting, about privatizing, but politicizing. It's about good policing in a democracy. It's something we should insist upon.
You mentioned briefly what the previous government did to curb and succeeded in curbing violence, gun violence in the Arab sector. What did they do that the current government is not doing? And I'm guessing that the current government is not doing it not just because the minister is incompetent, but also it's a deliberate choice.
For one thing, they had a strategy, which is something that we don't have anymore, a plan, what to do. So they worked on issues of employment and schooling and all kinds of ways of fighting crime with a coherent plan. Now, it's only a year and a half, so it's hard to judge a success based on that time. But at least they had a plan with goals set.
On the contrary, the fact that it kicked in so quickly means a lot, doesn't it?
Yeah, but maybe a year later, things would have, fallen
Right, yeah,
apart.
sure.
So it's a bit difficult to talk about a year and a half and make very bold statements of that. But they did have a plan. It worked. There were a mindset that it would work. Well, this minister and the government simply have no strategy. So on some point, yes, they don't care. But I think it's beyond that. I think they simply can't get their act together to create a coherent plan.
Say the government falls tomorrow morning, we're all crossing our fingers, and a new, more competent and more caring minister comes in. How difficult do you think it will be to roll things back?
It'll be difficult because for many years, police was neglected. I think we have a police that has in it good people in some areas, but it's not big enough in many ways to match the size of the challenges that they face. All over the world, it's become a very difficult job, policing. And I think as a society, we put police on the front lines of society. Every neglect, every failure, educational, employment, economic, will eventually turn into a police problem. And we need to think how we tackle those issues. Now, defund the police had one point which I agree. There are some issues where we need less policing and more social services. We can't have a police officer solve every problem. When we do that, we put police on a trajectory to fail. So I think there needs to be much more investment. Needs to be a different mindset, a democratic mindset. And police is a very weak organization. That's why the current minister had such an easy time taking over. He promised police higher salaries, which was, by the way, a right thing to do. He promised them that he would back them up in case of violence, which was the wrong thing to do. We need more oversight, not less oversight. And that's about it. So I think the damage he has done is extensive, but it's not sophisticated. And maybe there is a point of hope that the new government would rethink police, again, in a way that building a police for a democratic society. I'm again stressing those words because that's what we need to be fighting about.
Professor Guy Ben-Porat, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And also big thanks to Itai Shelem, the manager of TLV1 Studios. And now we've got a request because many or most of you listen to us on the Apple Podcast app. And we would like to ask you to please consider writing us a review. Good, bad, ugly, up to you. You too can support us by going to our website and subscribing onto our Patreon campaign. Check out our archive. It has more than 1,000 interviews by now. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter and now on Blue Sky as well. And most important, join us again next time for another edition of the Tel Aviv Review. And until then, from us here in Tel Aviv, goodbye.